Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans les campagnes mugir ces féroces soldats? Ils viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils, nos compagnes. Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons. Marchons, marchons, qu'un sang impur abreuve nos sillons. Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons. Marchons, marchons, qu'un sang impur abreuve nos sillons.
Hello everyone, this is Professor Hasselman and this is History 105 online. And today we're going to be talking about the Age of Revolutions from about 1775 to around 1815. Now, prior to talking about this, we've already talked about absolutism in France with Louis XIV and other absolute monarchs, and we also talked a little bit about the enlightened despots, or these enlightened monarchs that use some of the Enlightenment thinking when ruling their people. Now, before we start talking about the revolution and the problems that were going on in society at the time, I want to draw your attention to something written by Louis XV of France around this time period. So on March the 3rd, 1766, after repeated quarrels with the judges of the Paris Parlement, who insisted on their right to object to royal decrees, Louis XV convened a lit de justice, or a ceremony used to compel the magistrates to accept the royal will. So in other words, the people were getting a little upset and the king had to assert his will over them. Now he seized this occasion to remind the judges of the principles of French absolutism as they had developed by his predecessor, Louis XIV. And so let's take a look at what Louis XV had to say about absolutism. So these are Louis XV's words in 3rd of March, 1766. It is my person alone that the sovereign power resides, whose special character is the spirit of prudence, of justice, and of reason. So we can hear a little bit of the enlightened thinking, the enlightened ideals of the time. He continues, I alone exercise the power of making laws, independently and undividedly. The entire public order proceeds from me and the rights and interests of the nation, which some have dared to separate from the monarch, are necessarily united with mine and rest exclusively in my hands. So that's kind of a view of what how the monarchs at the time felt about their rule, especially in France. Now, the Enlightenment's emphasis on political legitimacy and authority, one of the things to remember is that enlightened thinkers did not really trust in the idea of democracy. They still felt that there needed to be legitimate rulers, and as far as we know, the only legitimate rulers were kings. And they also perceived, the corruption of absolute monarchs. So, and this inspired several revolutions in the latter 18th century. Now, in France and in America, many citizens began to question why the majority of a nation's people were denied equal rights or liberty. And just to kind of give you one more idea of what's happening in this time period, this is a document written in 1788, kind of describing the revolutionary spirit at the time. And this is, if you look at this, you'll be reading a little bit about Abbé Sieyès' What is the Third Estate? This future deputy at the time, his name was Rabot Saint-Étienne. He wrote a work called Considerations on the Interests of the Third Estate, and he provided the clearest statement of the revolutionary challenge to France's existing institutions that developed in the months of the meeting of the Estates General. And you'll do a little bit of reading of the roots of the French Revolution and the way that the society was split up at the time. And in this excerpt, Rabot Saint-Etienne expresses the revolutionaries' general attitude towards the past and calls on the Third Estate to adopt a new mentality. So here's his words. So this is Considérations sur l'intérêt de tiers états, or Considerations on the Interests of the Third Estate. So here's his words from Rabot Saint-Etienne. It is obvious that there is only one real interest, and that is the interest of all. Where the interest of all is not properly understood, one should at least follow the interest of the largest number. The largest number is the Third Estate, composed of 25 million subjects as against 500,000 or 600,000 from privileges, or the members of the First and Second Estate, the clergy and the nobles respectively. The distinction of ranks does not justify any distinction of political rights. If there were such a distinction, it would be unjust that power should belong to the smallest group, and this sub-aristocracy would be unconstitutional. So in other words, when you think about what he's saying there, he's saying that it doesn't make sense why such a large group of people should have the least amount of power. And if you read anything else, if you take an American history course during this time period, this similar argument is made by Thomas Paine in his work Common Sense, where he argues how a small nation like Britain has no right to govern over a large group of states like the 13 colonies. Now, he continues, since national assemblies are assemblies of taxpayers, only taxpayers should be included. And he's likening he's kind of making an example of how the First and Second Estates, with the privileged estates, didn't pay taxes. And those who do not pay taxes should not be included. Since those who are included have this right only as taxpayers, and therefore form only one category, the Estates General are only a single body, a body of taxpayers. So in other words, the First and Second States don't really belong unless they're willing to pay taxes as well. Now he continues, these are the true principles. This is your code. These are your true instructions, Third Estate, and I invite you to meditate on them. Don't bother to open your books. You will find them full of contradictions. Don't try to follow the conduct of your ancestors. They had no principles to follow, and they were degraded. Don't ask what was done before, because you know what it was. You were sacrificed. Consult only good sense, which is the same in all countries and all epochs, and the law of nature, the basis of all rights, whose principles can never be overridden. So in other words, he's using both an economic and a conservative way of looking at things. I mean, he's not saying focus on the way things should have been at the time. He's saying instead, look, it makes perfect sense. It's common sense, as Thomas Paine would have written in 1776, that it makes absolutely no sense why a large body should be in control. Now, as I said, in France and America, many citizens began to question why the majority of a nation's people were denied equal rights or liberties, just as Rabot Saint-Etienne had mentioned in his considerations here. Now, in 1776 and 1789, respectively, the Americans and French revolted against the tyrannical and illegitimate authority of aristocrats in order to protect the sovereign rule of the people, as opposed to the sovereign rule of the monarch. In America, patriots replaced the British monarchy with a confederated republic, and in France, revolutionaries abolished the constitutional monarchy in favor of a new republic. However, the French Republic was short-lived. Napoleon, in effect, proclaimed himself dictator in France in 1799. Now, in this unit, we'll examine the emerging contest between the rule of the people and the rule of the few in the Euro-American world. which at this point America becomes an extension of Western civilization. This contest manifested itself in two different but related revolutions that had a lasting impact upon Europe. Now, when you're done with this unit, you should be able to identify the major intellectual trends that supported revolutionary ideas, describe the causes of the French Revolution, compare and contrast the ideals of the French Revolution with reality, and describe the origins and effects of the Napoleonic regime.